The Voidspire stood as a towering monument against the blood-red sky, its runic symbols faintly glowing along its jagged surface. For centuries it had been sealed, its ancient doors untouched by time, but whispers of the prophecy had drawn many to its dark halls. None had returned. Astra, a warrior with a scarred past and a soul touched by shadow, had come seeking the truth of the Bloodscript. Beside her walked Seren, a quiet scholar with secrets as deep as the Voidspire's depths, both bound by a fate they didn't yet understand. The Bloodscript, written in ancient texts, had foretold the rise of the black-winged Seraphim, the harbinger of the end of days. Astra had spent years hunting down the fragments of the prophecy, each piece more cryptic than the last. Now, at the gates of the Voidspire, the final verse seemed within reach. The world's balance had already begun to shift, and strange omens followed Astra like shadows, rivers running red, the sun dimming behind an eternal eclipse, and the ever-present whispers of forgotten gods. As they entered the Voidspire, the oppressive weight of the air pressed down on them. The walls were lined with carvings of winged figures, their faces twisted in anguish. The atmosphere within was thick with an ancient, malevolent force. Seren moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the cryptic symbols that pulsed with dark energy, as if alive. "The Bloodscript lies ahead," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But something has changed." It wasn't like this in the tomes. Each step deeper into the Voidspire brought a sense of impending doom. The walls seemed to close in, and a cold wind howled through the narrow passageways, as if warning them to turn back. Astra's hand tightened on the hilt of her blade, her thoughts darkening. She had been driven by a need to understand her place in the prophecy, to unravel the mystery that bound her to this cursed place. But something in the air whispered of a deeper truth, one she might not be ready to face. Finally, they reached the heart of the Voidspire, a vast chamber dominated by a blood-red altar. At its center lay the Bloodscript itself, carved into the stone in words that seemed to shift even as Astra stared at them. The prophecy was alive, its text twisting and contorting as if rewriting itself in real time. "It's changing," Seren said, his voice laced with fear. "The Bloodscript is rewriting our fate." As Astra and Seren delved deeper into the Voidspire, the air grew colder, and the shifting Bloodscript began to echo through the chamber, an eerie sound that crawled beneath their skin. Every twist of the text sent a ripple of unease through Seren, his scholar's mind unable to comprehend what was happening. Astra moved forward with steely resolve, though even she could not deny the sense that the walls themselves were watching them. The Voidspire was changing, adapting to the Bloodscript's new message. The farther they ventured, the more the carvings on the walls seemed to come alive. Winged figures once frozen in stone now appeared to move in the flickering torchlight. Their faces, contorted in agony, began to whisper in a language neither could understand. "We need to leave," Seren said, his voice cracking with fear, but Astra pressed on. "There's no going back," she muttered, her eyes fixed on the shifting symbols ahead. The weight of the prophecy bore down on her. She knew they were nearing the truth. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, a violent quake that sent cracks racing up the walls. From the deepest recesses of the Voidspire, a voice echoed, a low, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through their bones. "The Seraphim awakens." Seren stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror, but Astra held her ground, her heart pounding. The prophecy was no longer just words. Something ancient and malevolent was stirring within the Voidspire, and they were at its mercy. They reached a massive stone door, covered in intricate carvings of black-winged figures. The Bloodscript on the door glowed a deep crimson, and the symbols continued to shift, rewriting the fate they had come to decipher. "It's rewriting everything," Seren whispered. Astra stepped forward, her hand hovering over the door's surface. "The Seraphim will rise, and so will we," she said, pushing the door open with a loud creak. The chamber beyond was dark, but the flicker of crimson light illuminated what waited inside. As they entered the final chamber, they were greeted by a massive towering figure, a statue of a black-winged seraphim, its wings spread wide, casting shadows over the room. The Bloodscript pulsed on the floor beneath its feet, shifting faster now, almost violently. Seren's breath caught in his throat. "This is it, the heart of the prophecy," he whispered. Astra approached the statue, her pulse quickening. The end of days was written beneath them, but the Bloodscript had already begun to rewrite their destiny. The chamber was immense, its high ceiling disappearing into shadows above. The towering statue of the black-winged seraphim loomed over Astra and Seren, its stone eyes seemingly alive, following their every movement. The Bloodscript beneath it pulsed violently now, casting strange shadows across the room. Astra's breath quickened as the prophecy felt more real than ever. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on her, as if the seraphim itself was calling her to act. Suddenly, the floor began to crack, and streams of crimson light surged from the Bloodscript, flowing like rivers of molten fire toward Astra. Seren gasped, stepping back in horror, but Astra stood her ground. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rumbling. The prophecy had always spoken of the Seraphim's rise, but now it was happening, and the script was no longer the same. The fate they had come to decipher was unraveling before their eyes. As the light wrapped around her, Astra's body began to glow, her veins pulsing with the same crimson energy. She could feel the power coursing through her, but something was wrong. The Bloodscript was shifting faster now, its words rewriting themselves into something far more sinister. "Astra, stop!" Seren shouted. But it was too late. The Seraphim statue began to move, its massive wings stretching out as if awakening from a long slumber. The ground shook violently as the Seraphim came to life, its black wings unfurling with a deafening sound. Its eyes blazed with a terrible light, and the room filled with a gust of wind so powerful it knocked Seren to the ground. "You were never meant to stop this," the Seraphim's voice boomed, a low and otherworldly sound. Astra's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the Bloodscript had changed their fate. It had turned them into its instruments. As the Seraphim raised its wings, the entire Voidspire trembled. The walls began to collapse, and dark energy surged toward the sky. Astra knew that she had to make a choice. Either embrace the power coursing through her and fulfill the prophecy, or resist it and find a way to stop the rise of the Seraphim. Her eyes locked onto Seren, who struggled to rise, his face pale with fear. The end of days was no longer a distant threat. It was happening now. The Voidspire trembled as cracks spread through its ancient structure, the very foundation of the tower seeming to split apart. The Seraphim, now fully awakened, towered over Astra, its black wings casting a shadow that stretched across the chamber. Dark energy pulsed from its form, rippling through the air. Astra felt the pull of the prophecy, the Bloodscript binding her to its will. But deep inside, she knew that she could still resist, though the cost could be devastating. Seren, bruised and terrified, managed to push himself to his feet. He looked up at Astra, his voice shaking. "We have to stop this. You can't let the prophecy control you." Astra's eyes flickered with uncertainty as the crimson glow intensified around her. She could feel the power surging through her veins, tempting her with promises of unimaginable strength. But as the Bloodscript continued to shift, it whispered of betrayal, of a fate she hadn't foreseen. With a sudden roar, the Seraphim's wings beat the air, sending a shockwave that shattered the remaining statues and sent debris flying through the chamber. Astra was thrown back, landing hard against the stone floor, but she quickly scrambled to her feet. The Seraphim's eyes locked onto her, filled with an ancient malice. It knew her choice would decide the fate of the world. "You were always meant to fall," the Seraphim's voice boomed. "The Bloodscript has already foretold it." Astra clenched her fists, her heart pounding. She could feel the pull of the prophecy, dragging her closer to the precipice. The Bloodscript was changing, rewriting her destiny before her very eyes. She had to make a choice. Either submit to the Seraphim's will and unleash the end of days, or fight against the Bloodscript's pull, even if it meant her own destruction. The weight of the prophecy pressed down on her, but for the first time Astra realized that the Bloodscript could be defied. As the Voidspire continued to collapse around them, Astra took a deep breath. She looked at Seren, her decision clear in her eyes. "It's not written yet," she said, her voice steady. Summoning every ounce of strength, she turned to face the Seraphim. The crimson light around her began to shift, changing from a glow of power to one of resistance. The prophecy had brought her here, but Astra would decide how it would end. The Voidspire groaned, its ancient stones crumbling beneath the weight of the prophecy's unfolding. Astra stood firm, the crimson light around her transforming, no longer a symbol of power, but one of defiance. The Seraphim towered before her, its dark wings beating against the collapsing structure. The end was close, but Astra had made her choice. She would not allow the Bloodscript to control her fate. The prophecy had shifted, but so had she. "It doesn't have to end this way," Seren shouted from behind, his voice strained with desperation. Astra glanced at him, her eyes now glowing with a soft, defiant light. She knew what had to be done. The Bloodscript pulsed beneath her feet, but its power was no longer overwhelming her. Instead, it flowed through her, bending to her will rather than dictating it. The Seraphim's voice echoed in the chamber. "You were born to fulfill this prophecy. There is no escape." Astra's heart pounded as the words of the Bloodscript shifted once more, rewriting the prophecy as it had so many times before. But now the words were different, altered by her defiance. The rise of the black-winged Seraphim was no longer the end of days. It was a choice, and she had chosen to fight. The power surging through her veins was not to bring destruction, but to seal away the ancient forces that sought to end the world. The Seraphim let out a roar, its wings unfurling one final time, but Astra raised her hand, the crimson light coalescing into a barrier of shimmering energy. The Bloodscript reacted to her command, its words freezing in place, no longer shifting. The Seraphim's eyes flared with fury, but it could not break through. "You were never meant to control me," Astra whispered. With a final surge of energy, the Seraphim's form began to dissolve, the dark power receding as the prophecy collapsed upon itself. As the Voidspire crumbled around them, Astra turned to Seren. "It's over," she said, her voice calm but heavy with the weight of what had passed. The Bloodscript no longer pulsed beneath her feet. The prophecy had been broken, rewritten by her will. The Seraphim was gone, and with it, the looming threat of the end of days. The Voidspire, now little more than ruins, was silent at last. As they made their way out of the collapsing tower, Astra couldn't help but glance back one last time. The Bloodscript had changed, but so had she.